What's up, everybody? Welcome into ESPN FC live here on YouTube. That's Janusz Mihalik. I'm Dallin Cuff. Newcastle 1-0 through an Anthony Gordon, let's say mildly controversial 64th minute goal. Gives the Magpies the win. They move up to fifth now on the table. Arsenal still holds at third place on 24 points. Janusz, there's a lot to talk about. Not a lot of chances, but a lot to get into in this match. We actually talked about it on Wednesday here on this very same show about what we would see today. Just give me kind of your big picture thought on Newcastle walking with 3 points here today.
Well, the big point up until, the goal, the controversy and all that was two very, very good teams with incredible progress, right? Up until the goal, I was making notes and, part of me thought that it looks like it's going to be a draw, right? I mean, let's be fair here. I mean, Newcastle created they did maybe just look a little bit more dangerous at times. And I'm not counting the end there when they were losing, right? I mean, they looked a little bit different, before I say everything, because I think, Arsenal have been done wrong here, but they didn't create anything. That's the problem, and you can't get past that. And even on that goal, we'll get to it. Before I forget, there's got to be again more questions about David Raya on that cross. He was out at sea for sure. I mean, missed that ball. I mean, before the cross even came in, I think he was overcommitted to their near post. I'm not saying it's all his fault, but again, questions can be asked. Overall, I think for Arsenal, my notes were that a point at St. James's goes a long, long way, because there's been questions about Arsenal, about the physicality. I think you and I and everybody have talked. I think I almost want to say that's history. They have proven that they have the character. My notes said, wow, maybe one too many draws, because I thought it was going to be the fourth draw. But the ones against Chelsea, coming back while playing terribly, showed me a lot in terms of Arsenal and their character and their discipline. Their discipline was tremendous today because they've been baited. It was very, very physical. Many still felt. I mean, I was listening to a lot of shows today, and everybody still questioned physicality, especially against this Newcastle team. And I thought they not only did they answer it, but they were composed for the most part. Didn't bite on some of the no calls, and it would have been perfect. But in the end, they did lose. How and what we think about it, it's a whole other story.
We'll get to that story in just a second. To your point, I do think the Arsenal's not physical enough, don't have the mental or physical toughness is an old trope. You're applying that to an old team. I don't think you've been paying attention to watching this team for the last 18 months. That said, they are supposed to be able to create goals, and I will credit Newcastle. By and large, when Odegaard especially is not able to play in this team, they rely on Martinelli and Saka to generate a lot and be creative on the wings. And Martinelli was absent. I think even John Champion, who called the game in the States, made a comment to them at the 15-minute mark. Martinelli was the first time he made any kind of touch on the ball within the attacking third. And Saka the same way. They did a good job of containing him. And overall, Newcastle took advantage of the one kind of half chance they made. And we do have to get right into this, though, because it wasn't just one VR check. I don't know if I've seen this before since we've had VAR, where 3 different instances were reviewed on the same play. The ball going out of bounds at the end line, the ball then played in, and Joel Linton potentially for a foul on Gabriel. And then last but not least was Anthony Gordon, the goal scorer, onside as that ball kind of ricocheted back into his path, just inches away from the goal line. Should that have goal stood across all 3 of those places? Now, for our audience, I am a Gooner, so I'm going to trying to be as objective as possible here. But what do you think about that goal standing, given all those objections, if you will?
It's insane. It's insane. I mean, we do this too often. It's insane. Look, I mean, to me, there weren't 3, because the first one, the line, we all know because we don't see it. God only knows why. But probably in this instance, because it was inconclusive, right? And you can see it because, the lines that you see drawn on social media, wherever it is, the overhead, which would have been nice to see, maybe showed or didn't show, right? So if it's inconclusive, it's inconclusive. Sometimes it does happen. You have to play on, because even if it stayed in play, you ask a question, why wasn't there pressure? But I mean, for anyone to think that Joelinton didn't push and foul Gabriel, that to me is crazy. I mean, I cannot understand why that wasn't. Look, we are going to hear some convoluted explanation that in my book is going to be a horse manure. There's going to be some interpretation of the laws of the games that they're going to try to push it down our throat that nobody is going to buy. And Mr. Howard Webb is Mr. Apology. That's what we're going to probably hear on Monday. We should hear that. Probably see another referee, demoted for a game or not. It's just incredible. Anybody that's watched that, it's a clear foul. It doesn't really matter later, the third one, offside or not. That shouldn't matter, because that in itself, this particular one, if they had any doubts about ball being in play, then the second was an easy decision, because I just don't, it's impossible for me to think that there's some sane explanation for that not to be a foul.
Okay, like I said, I'm going to try to be objective. So in the first play, when the ball goes out of bounds or close to it, you can wave that off. And I will say Ben White did not close down the ball. You could see some of the Arsenal players did switch off. It wasn't just the back line. For the midfielders, they didn't track back. They did switch off. So that is on them.
Absolutely.
That said, Joel Linton, there is no more clear thing. He has two hands in Gabriel's back. And the most obvious thing is, if he's not there, would Gabriel have bent his body and missed the ball? That's like the easiest question to ask. Would he have somehow not been able to just put his head on the ball and flick it on, as he was attempting to do, without having a guy that's big and physical and strong with two hands outstretched into his lower back? It just seemed, as soon as we got to that one, I was like, oh, this seems obvious. And every time you think it seems obvious, it just doesn't go that way. It defies logic. And that's where the weird part is for VAR.
I just hope that I don't hear, you have to be stronger than this. Or maybe he was just resting his hands on his back, because he wasn't. There's a clear motion going forward. It doesn't have to be a lot. It's a foul, because if he stands, that ball still bounced around. It didn't go directly into the goal, right? You can always say that Gabriel maybe somehow could have slid and stopped it. It's a foul. I don't know how to explain, because there's no explanation for it, and that's just the problem. I just anything short of apology for that, and of course, as you've said it, we do need to talk about what happened before and what happened after, because I think Arsenal, as you've mentioned, and well played on that one in terms of pressure on the ball, and David Raya, in my opinion, being somewhat at fault for that goal as well, and maybe the entire way that Arsenal played. They fought, they showed physicality, they showed composure, they understood what's coming their way at a very difficult ground. But for the most part, as you said, didn't really create anything. So you sometimes say, well, there's always going to be one incident that may cost you a game, and then you still have to be able to show that you can overcome it. And fair play, this wasn't a perfect game from Arsenal by any means, but it's just sad that this is such an obvious and easy mistake to correct by VAR, and it wasn't. I don't understand why, because at the end of the day, I probably think that this would have been a draw.
I thought it deserved to be a draw. We talked about it on Wednesday. That's what I thought it was going to be. Full disclosure, that's what I bet it this morning. I thought that's what we were looking at with these two teams, with all the injuries and how both these teams have played, especially how good Newcastle's been defensively on the road, and conversely how good Arsenal's been on the road. When you look at the betting lines, the under 2.5 goals was heavily favored in this matchup, and obviously that cashed if you played that. I don't want to keep coming back to Stuart Atwell's refereeing decisions or Anley Matley as the VAR. But there were two other instances, one on each team, which were potential red card instances I do want to get your thought on. There was Kai Havertz with a challenge, a late challenge, I believe on Gordon actually in the first half. And then you have Bruno Guimaraes, which was an elbow away from the ball on Jorginho in his head. For both instances, let's start with Havertz first. They ended up issuing a yellow, quick review, yellow stayed. Guimaraes, same thing, yellow. It was reviewed, yellow stayed. Where do you stand on both those instances? Because we could have been playing 10-11 at either point.
Yeah, well, Havertz just saved himself just enough. He did get a booking on that play, didn't he?
Yeah, he got a yellow.
Yeah. And remember, in the second half, he had a long touch and chased it. That, by the way, if we're very honest, could have. If the first one was a yellow card, which I think it wasn't a red card, but he should have been cautioned. I think that was the first time where I thought Stuart Atwell lost himself a little bit, didn't he? I mean, that was at the very least, you'd have to think that's a booking. It wasn't. It puts a Havertz in a different position, because, by the way, today, again, I don't think Havertz was very good, but I thought he fought. He was very physical. His work rate was incredible, almost as if he wanted to make up the fact that he hasn't been at his best, hasn't been contributing in terms of scoring or maybe creating, but he knew how big of a game this was. He knew that this is probably one of the few, I don't want to say one of the last, but one of the few opportunities he's going to get, because he's not making it easy for Mikel Arteta to put him in a lineup. If it wasn't for Odegaard, he wouldn't have been there. So that was the first one. again, you look at Guimaraes. I mean, if that's not a red card, what is? Right? Excessive force. He knew exactly what he was doing. Extended that elbow. I mean, he could have gotten 4, 5, 6 yellow cards towards the end. That you could clearly see that he was trying to make a point of some sorts, and almost as if he didn't care if he was going to get yellow carded. Maybe the fact that he who they play in the next game. I mean, maybe he wanted to get that fit.
They have Bournemouth next in the league, but they have Dortmund midweek for a Champions League.
Well, that's not going to matter. But almost as if he wanted to sit out the next game. He was doing just about everything. So again, VAR here, I don't understand. Don't have an explanation. Again, the explanation, and as I said, apology is going to come for those 2 incidents. At least one, if somehow they are able to explain one of them, which I'm sure they're going to try. But knowing Howard Webb from our shores here, he's been pretty straightforward. It hasn't been easy. He's been more honest than anybody else before him in terms of at least admitting mistakes. But at the end of the day, it's one thing to explain mistakes every week, but it's too many. So that's another one. Not to mention that there's just it doesn't feel like the referee was in control of the game, but VAR failed him again.
That game was as intense as you're going to see in physical in the first 45, to your point. It was, and I do think Havertz's challenge also set it off to a different level. He was very lucky that he kind of got a little bit of the ball, and it was a little bit late. There wasn't a ton of contact on the standing leg. When he went in, I honestly yelled, "Oh no," because I thought it was a red immediately on first glimpse. But when you see the replays, you can see why yellow is legit. To your point, though, in that second half challenge where he had a heavy touch and he went in and he had 2 boots up, that in my book is probably yellow again too. He should not have finished that game. If you're being completely objective. So he should have been out with 2 yellows, I think.
Absolutely. We have to be honest here because, yes, you can understand how Arsenal fans, manager, and the players will look at Guimaraes, not a red, and the goal itself, and you say, my goodness, they've been hard done by. But Havertz escaped, in my opinion. The first one, as I said, just saved himself. There was excessive force going into it. I don't think to me, he was never getting there, but I think the foot was down. It was side of the foot. It was the trailing leg that got him, and it wasn't with the studs leading. And I think that's why he saved himself. Deep down, looking at it over and over, it was probably a right decision not to show red because many felt that in real time it may have looked like a red. But for him not to get a yellow for that, that's crazy as well. So, I mean, where do you look here? If you referee, if you VAR, it's going to be hard for them to save themselves in this. But after that, I don't want to take anything away from Newcastle. Arsenal would look at it at that point, as I've said, gladly, because that would have been best defense together with Manchester City, another clean sheet at a difficult ground. It would have been good point away.
Yeah.
But for Newcastle, I mean, you look at the players that they've been missing. Again, Jacob Murphy comes in, and I don't know why they risked him, right? Because there was talk already, okay, we're going to try to play him and see maybe there's a surgery after the season or during the break, whatever it may be. And he's out as well. But they've had so many injuries, suspension with Tonali, key players missing. They're in a difficult group in the Champions League. Another massive game coming their way. They were at home. They fought, as you know, they would. And I think ultimately got something out of it. I don't think they should be apologizing for that because just slightly, I thought they were the better team. They just created a little bit. Ben White's been struggling whole season. It seems that way. He was substituted. But I think Anthony Gordon in the second half, there was a moment, 15, 20 minutes where I just thought that's where Newcastle a little bit more dangerous. As we've said, Arsenal didn't create any clear-cut chances for the most part. Key to see why they miss Odegaard. He gives you something special, doesn't he? He gives you that extra 5 seconds maybe for the key players to maybe find themselves or maybe give them time to open themselves in a better position. Because you've mentioned Saka and Martinelli. Not that they were bad, but obviously they sort of needed that sort of a calmness on the ball, that extra circle, that extra hesitation that gives you that extra yard to maybe gain on your defender. And Odegaard is irreplaceable in that midfield. One great point is the play of Declan Rice.
Oh yeah, that was
Incredible,
painful.
incredible. Once again, a player who, for me, could play on any team in the world.
$100 million is a bargain for that guy. I mean, the ground he covers, the plays he breaks up, and today you saw him doing things as well, getting forward, trying to make. This way he makes passes too. He's exceptional. I do want to finish on Guimaraes because I just didn't weigh in. That's a blatant red card. So that's the sad part. I do want to. I just don't understand how Stuart Atwell's not asked, hey, go look at this, because he didn't look at the monitor one time. So it's Andy Madley made all these decisions in the VAR room. Not once did they call him to the monitor to review them. And the Guimaraes is pretty clear in the letters of the law. Any contact away from the ball by a player and the head or neck area is violent conduct and due a red card. It's pretty black and white. So I don't know how you look at it and not allow somebody to rectify that situation. Especially that's kind of what VAR is there for. Atwell's not necessarily going to see that. The play moved on. That's not necessarily his job to see that behind the play. That's why the cameras are there. That's why VAR is there. But we don't need to belabor it anymore.
This is a massive disconnect, but there's always situations, but there are a couple here that are, to me, mind-boggling. Something that we need to go deeper. And look, I don't wish anybody ill will, but I think for me, there's got to be suspensions that just like players. Sometimes we talk about players.
There has to be accountability. That's what the lack of accountability, that these mistakes are made over and over again. And yes, you get demoted, you miss a week, but this is the best league in the world. It's the most watched. It's the highest paid. The biggest media rights. You have to have the commensurate level of officiating to match this, and that's why I think it's weird when you look at other countries too. I feel like, especially in Germany, they're not concerned with the referee in the middle, like his or her feelings on the call. They're trying to get it right, and I think a lot of times, whether it was you hear Mike Dean say what he thought as a VAR in the past and didn't want to show up this guy, didn't want to put him in the spotlight. Just get the call right. Just don't take all the emotion out of it and your feelings about who's on the field, who's refereeing the game, and try to use the right judgment on the play. And I do think you could use, and this is from former players saying this, and tell me what you think about this, having former players in that room as well, because there seems to be an interpretation of how the game is played is missed sometimes by the officials in there making the decisions, and maybe they don't have the understanding of what it's like on the pitch, because some of these decisions seem obvious when I listen to former players, and it seems like they're missing something in that room.
Look, maybe. Bottom line for me is I feel cheated. I feel cheated. I'm not a fan of Newcastle or Arsenal. I feel cheated because in preparation, instead of talking about the game, and I was making some tactical points because it was a fascinating game. Maybe not a lot of chances, but because of the physicality, because of the two massive clubs, because of the great atmosphere, because of the implications that this have, because Arsenal are going to be, again, pushing Manchester City. Newcastle are showing that they, once again, are going to be very, very important. And who knows, they may be pushing themselves, if not for top four. Maybe they'll progress somehow. And instead of that, I was just looking at replays maybe 10, 15, 20 times during the game because of everything that's happened in the game. That shouldn't happen. I should be able to watch this game and try to talk about who played well, who didn't. I wanted to make some notes because I felt it was a very interesting tactical game. And because that's something that I like to talk about, this was a perfect opportunity. Two managers that like to play positive football for the most part, that like to attack, which they did. Very bright manager and very young managers in Eddie Howe, who perhaps some thought that maybe this is going to be too big. And even when he got there with the new ownership, everybody's talking, or some people are talking about maybe they need a bigger manager. He's doing a tremendous job for Newcastle United. So is Mikel Arteta as well. And instead of this, we're spending this time, even though in the middle of it, I try to stop myself and get myself back to the game. But yet it feels in most of these big matches, we just talk about these decisions. And the unfair part about that is that it also happens in the smaller games, but this is what we do sometimes. We treat them as such. So it almost doesn't matter what happens when two smaller teams play as well. But that happens over and over and over again. And look, maybe one day they'll get it right. Technology improves, and I truly believe, I don't want to be absolutely negative on this one because I believe that they'll eventually get there. But I definitely feel cheated today because at the end of the day, I've made 10,000 notes about this game. And here we are talking about this because really it had such an impact on the game.
You said you feel cheated. I do as well as an Arsenal fan. But okay, let's get into the tactics of it a little bit now and move forward though too. When you think about this Newcastle team, they're now going to be in fifth in the table, trying to work themselves back into that top four. Obviously, the Champions League huge game against Dortmund after they dropped that home match against St James Park in match day 3 in the Champions League. When you look at this team, given the injuries they have, and we do have an international break in this month, so there's only 4 games left in the month, 2 league, 2 Champions League for them. What do you see? What is their way for them to continue to get results given some of the challenges they have?
Well, I mean, they have character. They probably, they take on the character of the city as well, even when they weren't at their best. Showing up at St. James's at the very least is not enough, even if you're a bad team. And we've seen some bad Newcastle teams not that long ago. But they do have a problem. Of course, we don't know exactly how long some of these injuries are going to take, but we saw with Jacob Murphy today. I look at players like Anderson. I look at players like Harvey Barnes long term. I look at Botman, who's super important, and I think that he re-injured himself. He was just about ready to come back, so that's going to be a big miss. I mean, not saying today that Lascelles didn't play well, but it's not the same level, especially when you're talking about the push for the top 4, maybe even further, and then Champions League, in which Newcastle are doing surprisingly well, let's be honest, for the first time. And they have big matches coming up. So I mentioned Botman, I mentioned Isak, Matt Target last game, Tonali now, obviously we know he's suspended for a long period of time. So they need help. I mean, they're going to have to react in January. And the question is, can they? When you look at the FFP, they certainly didn't probably think that they have to get numbers in terms of quality. Maybe they have some young players that they can come in, but it's going to be very interesting here because they're going to have to go for some numbers, and not just any numbers. I do think they may have to get 1, maybe 2 experienced players if the FFP allows them to do it. So there is a little bit of a problem for them. Well, much bigger than I initially thought.
And you mentioned the financial fair play there. That is going to be interesting. Also, even in that group is the toughest group with Milan and Dortmund and PSG and themselves. Somebody's going to play in the Europa League. And if you're playing Thursday and then Sunday in the back half of the season, to your point, that is a grueling trip for them if they maintain that. They want it because the money, they want it because the ability to maybe win another trophy and keep themselves in the Champions League in a different route if they can't get the top 4. But that's not easy to say the least. Flip it to Arsenal. Same thing. A lot of injuries. Obviously, no Jesus. We talk about Odegaard missing. You've got different guys trying to get back to full health. God forbid Saliba gets hurt again. And I don't know, that could be just the biggest injury in the season for Arsenal if that happens. But with their upcoming schedule, they got Sevilla midweek in the Champions League, Burnley, Brentford, and Lens again in the Champions League. Are they able to manufacture enough goals and score enough? Obviously, what they did to Sheffield United at home last weekend is you could throw that away a little bit. Against the bigger competition, and particularly in the Champions League, given missing some of those key guys, do you think they're able to generate enough to maintain the level and qualify in the Champions League, but also, just to keep chasing that City team and chasing Spurs?
Well, again, you have to be somewhat realistic. I mean, for them to be back in the Champions League, that's progress. I think they set themselves high goals or expectations, I suppose. But I think we all understand where in this building process Mikel Arteta is with Arsenal. Last year was tremendous. The real push for most of the season, they fell apart a little bit just to be there. I think they expect to come out of the group, but I don't think there's an expectation of Arsenal to say win the Champions League. So I don't think that's an issue, and I don't think they're going to prioritize, but I think without telling us, they understand that being in that top 4 it is the most important. And it's not a given because you see what's happening with Liverpool, the way they play. Spurs have real staying power, and I suspect that staying power is going to continue for the next 2 or 3 weeks, given their schedule, right? So as long as they do that, then the reality is going to be that Spurs may be in that top 4. We see Newcastle, we see West Ham, even though they lost as well. You see Brighton. I mean, there are teams that are going to take points away from you. It's going to directly affect your standings in the top 4. So I think Arsenal, I would imagine, there may come a point where they're going to have to look at this and say, well, maybe during the Champions League, there's a player, I'm not saying a lot of rotation, but player or 2 that are key that may may not start for that, where otherwise you'd say, wow, why isn't he in the starting 11? So that may come about because it's we're no longer even talking about top 6. We're talking about top 8 in terms of at least the fight for the Champions League and Europe in general.
I mean, for sure. I mean, Liverpool's got Luton Town tomorrow, and Aston Villa's got is in 5th. Excuse me. Before I said that Newcastle was in 5th. They're in 6th. They're behind Villa. Villa's got Nottingham Forest, and both those teams take 3 points. Arsenal finds himself in 5th. You know this whole table could flip around here within about 20 hours from now. You mentioned trying to find a player, and I don't want to always harp on him, but Havertz, you said his physicality was good in this game, but there were still some. He always finds himself in good spots as a player. How do you get yourself mentally in a confident space? Like, is there any way to do it without performing when the lights are on? Because when you talk to people, apparently he trains very well. The guys have tons of respect for him because they can see him in training and see how good he is. But it just doesn't seem to materialize on the pitch in a way that when you pay $70 million for a guy that you think that he can come in and fill that void, you don't want to go into the market and look for a guy that might have to play a similar position when you're thinking about January, or obviously if Jesus is still hurt, you need another striker to back up Nketiah. Like there are some redundancies here that you hope that wouldn't be there. And Havertz seems to be just a consistent disappointment, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think he's in a downward spiral. I don't know how you recover from that. I really don't. The only way it could have been that it's a fresh start again. Came to Arsenal, and you think that maybe you get going, and you make and when that happens, you almost have to make an impact immediately, because with every game's doubts creep into your own head as a player, but then everybody else, like us and the fans, pile on. And you look at him, and it's very similar to Timo Werner, right? I mean, two of those players came over to Chelsea, and you're always hoping. But what is it going to take for him? For example, for him to reverse that, what is it going to take? It's going to have to be number of goals, or it's going to have to be number of great assists in a midfield where it's still very difficult to find a spot for him, isn't it? Because when Odegaard's there, I still think Rice playing off of the left-hand side, probably not ideal. I think I see what Mikel Arteta is doing, because crazily enough, nobody can kind of replace what Granit Xhaka gave them, right? I mean, and at the very least on the left-hand side, he was left-footed as well. So, I mean, that paid dividends, because today, I don't know if you know this, but Havertz tried to deliver a couple of crosses with his left foot, and it was it wasn't good. So I just worry about it, that it's almost there almost isn't anything that he can do for us to say, this is it. He's not your typical creator that's going to be threading the needle here and there. He's a tweener, as we say it, in between the attack, maybe that false 9, although he isn't. He's somewhere in that midfield, in that 4-3-3, it doesn't work. 4-2-3-1, kind of, but they don't really play that way, do they, in Arsenal? And I don't think Mikel Arteta wants to play that way. That's what's interesting to me, and that when he got him in, maybe he was hoping for, but he's from the church of Pep Guardiola. He knows that it's a 4-3-3 all the time, because when you have Martinelli and when you have Saka, you don't really want to play in it. I know the 4-2-3-1 is possible, but I think the way they play, the way they defend in particular, I just don't see how that's going to happen. You're talking about Kai Havertz having 4 or 5 superb games in a row for me to even think that he's going to be an important part of this team. When I say important part of this team in a starting 11, it just doesn't seem that way.
It really doesn't. And you mentioned Werner too. And those guys, when you come over to these big clubs and you're coming from a foreign league to the Premier League, obviously there's a microscope on you to begin with, huge price tag to begin with, adds to that. And then you have a top 4, top 6 club level, Chelsea or Arsenal, just adds the pressure. And some guys sink or swim, and the guys that sink immediately, to your point, it's really hard for them to turn and course correct at that current club. And for Arsenal, that's a pretty big problem, because they could use somebody else in that midfield to have some creativity, especially with Odegaard being hurt. That's it for us here on ESPN FC Live. You can get the TV show every night, and obviously you can get it here on YouTube and all your social channels Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, ESPN FC Live. For Janusz, I'm Dallin. See you next time.